Hey, I'm Oriana. Let me tell you a story. Jeff died on a Sunday, and I didn't tell my kids until Wednesday. It took me that long to do the research that I felt I needed to do to prepare myself to share this devastating news with them that, for all I knew, would ruin them for the rest of their lives and crush them in a way that I wouldn't be able to save them from. So I spoke to grief counselors and psychologists and friends, other parents. I just got a whole bunch of advice, a whole bunch of different opinions and different viewpoints. And when I felt like I had enough information and I felt like I had a good enough hold on my own grief, because, I myself was in shock and grieving, and I needed to be able to make sure that I had my 2 feet firmly planted so that I could share that type of news with a 3 and a 5-year-old and be strong enough to withstand anything that came back from that, to be able to withstand their reaction, because I had no idea what that would entail. I mean, how can you imagine, When the doctor at the hospital came in and told me essentially that my husband was gone, one of my very first thoughts, obviously, was, how am I going to tell my kids? My son was 4.5 at the time. Any parents out there, you know that at 4.5, they are fully developed, conscious little people. And my son was so close with his dad. My daughter was too, but she was smaller, and I really found that my son and my husband really had this like boy to boy, rough and tumble, wrestling, video games, kind of stereotypical father-son relationship. And I knew that his father gave him things that I couldn't give him. And his father was like his best friend, his role model. And the idea of telling my little boy that his best friend is gone, there isn't even a word. It was terrifying, intimidating, overwhelming. My main concern about telling them was how to deliver something so horrendous and so heavy and somehow make it palatable for small children to understand, to try not to scare them too much. One thing I learned from the research I did was that a common reaction in children who lose one parent is that they become very fearful of losing the other parent. And it makes sense, because their whole life to this point has been so secure, with 2 parents who love them and keep them safe. And when you remove one parent so suddenly, their whole concept of safety and security crumbles. Just like all the books and therapists said it would happen. My son did ask me if I would die. Because I knew that question was coming, I had asked for some advice on how to deal with that question. And I wondered if it was appropriate for me to assure him that I'm not going anywhere, even though really I don't know, right? That's the whole point, is that we don't know. The main thing that losing Jeff taught me is that you just don't know. Nothing's guaranteed. You feel strong and young and healthy and positive and happy, and you feel like you have this long, beautiful life ahead of you. At least that's how I always felt. But we just don't know. It can just be gone. As much as that's a reality that I do want my children to understand, because I think that that's a part of life, to understand that it's fleeting and that everything is temporary and that it's not guaranteed. I want them to understand that. At the same time, at this age and while they're grieving, I really need them to feel safe and secure with me. And so a few counselors agreed that under these circumstances, even though technically it's not 100% true, they agreed it would be okay for me to sort of reassure my kids that mommy's gonna be okay. I'm not going anywhere. For a while, they were scared when I would go out, and I would assure them, I go out, but I come back. Another reason it took me a few days to tell them was because I really wanted to make sure that my whole family was here, present in my home when I delivered that news to them. Partly just to support me, because it was such a daunting and overwhelming task, and partly to support them, just to have love in the house. So on that Wednesday, I had my mom here, my sister, my sister-in-law, my nieces and nephews. Everybody was here gathered. I don't even remember if maybe there were other friends as well. There might have been. And I took my older 2 kids into their room, and I closed the door, and I laid down a blanket, and I said, here, let's have a little picnic. We're gonna have a little talk. And we sat together on the blanket, and I felt calm, and I didn't cry. I really find that in the moments that you need yourself to be the strongest, somehow your body just shows up for you. I needed to keep it together in that moment. At the same time, I do want to say that it's okay to cry in front of your kids, and you should definitely cry in front of your kids. I'll get into that later. But in this moment, I just wanted to be calm. And I just looked at them and I said, Daddy died. And I remember my son just kind of looked at me and they both almost laughed, like, because they're so small and this news is so ridiculous. It's so much bigger than them and what they can process. They didn't even know whether or not to take me seriously. That makes so much sense to me. So my son kind of smiled, and then I think they both kind of pretended to cry, and I told them that they're safe and that they're loved. And I said Daddy's love would last forever inside of them and that Daddy is now everywhere. I didn't want to talk about big words like heaven and spirits. I'm spiritual, but I don't want to imprint any of my beliefs onto them. I kind of want to let them figure that out for themselves when the time is right. At the same time, I wanted to give them some sense of the fact that I believe death is a transition more than an ending. And so I said, Daddy's everywhere. He's in the wind and the trees and the sky and the grass. And then they went to the window in their room. We have these big floor-ceiling windows in a condo. And they just looked out and they said, "Hi, Daddy. We love you." And that was it. We came out to be with the rest of the family. And one thing that I learned from the research that I did is that children grieve in puddles. That's what they call it. So children will be very sad and crying for one moment in time. And when they're done that moment, they will go right back into their play. And as adults, we might find that a little bit strange and confusing because adults don't grieve that way. Adults, we can be sad for hours and days and weeks on end. Kids don't do that, thank God. And I really witnessed that over the coming days and weeks, especially with my son, who was older and, like I said, had a really special bond with his dad for months. He would say, "Mommy," "Yes, Carter, I miss Daddy." "I know, Carter, I miss him too." He would say that. We would have that exchange every 2 or 3 hours. Every day. And he would often wake up in the middle of the night just to come cry with me. And we would cry together and then I would tuck him back into bed. Now that a year exactly has passed since the day my husband died, it's been really interesting to watch my kids and observe how they grieve and how they heal and how they grow. I can definitely see progress. I mean, the most common question that I get asked these days is, how are the kids? Are they okay? And at the moment, from what I can see, they're okay. We did do some family therapy, and I think that will become increasingly important as they get older. I think also once my son is a certain age, I'll want him to go to therapy without me, because at this age, everything is together, so I go with them. As much as they're smart and articulate kids, there's a limit to how they're able to express what they're feeling. We do a lot of artwork when we're having days when we all feel like we miss Daddy a lot, like certain milestones or just any day where it feels particularly heavy that day. We'll do some art. We'll write Daddy a letter. We'll draw him a picture, make him a card. We have a memory box and we just keep adding to it. And the memory box also has other trinkets and pictures and things that were his that were just kind of lying around the house. And I think that'll be a nice thing for them to carry forward into their adulthood and, visit it when they feel like they need a piece of him. It's really terrible and agonizing watching your kids in the thick of their grief. At some of our hardest moments, my son would tell me that he misses Daddy, and I would tell him that I love him and he's not alone and that we can miss Daddy together and that everything's gonna be okay. And there were many times that he said, "It's not gonna be okay." He once said, "I'm never gonna be okay." And I just had to dig deep down into my boots and reassure myself that wasn't true. And I know that that's not true. And I know that if I work on my own healing and healing in a healthy way, that will give me the best chance to help them heal in a healthy way. A big part of healing is really just peeling away all the layers and really being honest with yourself about what you feel. What are you scared of? What do you miss? What makes you sad? And also being equally open with yourself about joy and finding new ways to be happy and finding moments that make you happy and laughter, and not letting the guilt that can come with those positive emotions, not letting that get the best of you. Because I need to teach my kids that they can find joy. They can absolutely lead happy and healthy lives even after such a tremendous loss. That's the greatest lesson I can teach them. I've also learned that 2 steps forward and 1 step back is also really normal and natural. We'll have a really good couple months and then suddenly you just never know what will be a trigger. Now that we've just completed our first year without him, one thing I realized was that weather can be a trigger. My husband died in the spring, and when spring rolled around, my son took what seemed like a really big regression in his healing, and he was crying a lot more, and he was waking up at night a lot more, which he hadn't done in a while. You know, just talking about how much he misses daddy a lot. I don't think he understands that this is the season or the month in which daddy died, but there's some kind of intuition or something that he could feel. He just knew that something was reminding him that daddy's gone. And the most important thing to remember is that healing isn't linear. It's not just a steady progression up and up and up towards being healed. It's like all over the place, and it's forward and it's back and up and down, and every day can be different. There's my baby. But you just have to take comfort in the fact that every day you're making progress. And while the pain doesn't shrink and the hole inside you doesn't actually get smaller, you learn how to build your life around it, and it can be a full and beautiful life for you and your kids. And that's my story. This video was brought to you by Grief to Growth by Oriana.